Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 14th, 2017. I have not shaken whatever it is that's got the frog in my throat just yet, and I think it's getting set to ramp up, if anything, but we can survive that. And in fact, we'll have some unexpected this morning, at least for this morning, help with Greg Dworkin joining us. I thought that he was not going to be able to join us at some point today, which is a usually scheduled visit. He had some additional training to go through over at work. He was super enthused. Did he sneak a mention in of that at the end of yesterday's show? I think so. At any rate, guess what? It's been canceled. Snow! Hooray! It's the first snow day of the year in Connecticut in terms of canceling stuff. Anyway, they probably got a dusting or maybe even a little bit more when we all got a little bit on the East Coast on Saturday. My kids were camping out with the Scouts. That was super fun. One of them was assigned the job of cooking spaghetti in the middle of a snowstorm. So outdoors, that was pretty interesting. He managed pretty well. It worked out just fine. Everything should be okay this morning. And we'll be glad to have Greg on hand to try and help us through the show and use him as a crutch for resting the voice. Tomorrow's going to be something of a challenge, but maybe a lot of, I don't know, hot tea between now and then. It sounds like the sort of thing that's supposed to fix you up, right? Chicken soup, hot tea, bed rest. Well, forget it. That's not happening. Too much to catch up on. And, of course, too much to catch up on today. Big article out this morning that everybody is trying to pore over and grab quotes from. A Washington Post piece about how Donald Trump is a giant idiot again and leaving us vulnerable to Russia. Doubting the intelligence, Trump pursues Putin and leaves a Russian threat unchecked. A very long, large, somewhat rambling piece, and that might be perfect for today. Large and somewhat rambling, like the president, really. So I guess they really personified him. They really captured his essence in this piece. Lots of people focusing on lots of different parts. We'll see if we can hit the highlights at the very least, if not comb through the entirety of the thing. Today also, of course, December 14th, 12/14, and our 5th anniversary, unfortunately, of the shooting in Sandy Hook Elementary School. That will, of course, write a lot of mention, and of course, Greg will make mention of it because he's from Newtown, Connecticut. Of course, never far from his mind, these incidents, and I guess, we'll be discussing, I'm sure at some point, the progress in some places and lack of progress in others that has marked the 5 years since. I don't think it's a mystery to anyone as to why we haven't made more or better progress in some sensible gun legislation. The answer, of course, the National Rifle Association and the fetishization of guns in this country. I don't know if it's necessarily getting worse, that fetishization. I think it's always been kind of bad. It definitely was on the upswing for a while there. I think we've almost peaked at that, but the fallout from it maybe hasn't peaked just yet. After all, it was only a short time ago that we had the shooting in Las Vegas, and we had like literally 600 people shot in the span of 10 minutes with a makeshift machine gun from out of a hotel window. And we still haven't really gotten around to deciding what exactly are we going to do about that. And prior to that, of course, members of Congress shot down practicing for their congressional baseball game. Not much of a reaction to that one either, to be perfectly honest. And, of course, lots of mass shootings along the way. No doubt about that. In churches all over the country, in nightclubs all over the country. Not really dealing with this all too well. But, I mean, the press is there. The press is highlighting the issue. It's just, I don't know, some certain segment of the population just still unwilling to wrestle with the reality of it. Speaking of wrestling with reality, though, someone who's not unwilling to wrestle with it. Greg Dworkin now joins us from Connecticut. Good morning, Greg. I understand it's a snowy morning there?
Yeah, it is.
Right.
It looks like the snow is stopping, but the roads are slick, and it's winter.
All right, so you call
maybe
things
not
off
formally, but it's winter.
winter enough. Don't they say what is meteorological winter? They give us a break and say, yeah, December.
It's cold.
Or is it the other way around?
It's 21 degrees, and
right.
there's ice on the roads, and what else do you need for it to be winter?
I don't know. I guess the arrival of December 20th, according to the calendar, but for everybody else, December is a winter
What do they know?
month. Yeah,
the calendar says it's winter, and part of the reason, of course, is the solstice and the shortest day of the year.
Yes, that's, I would say, the majority of the reason.
But the fact that the sunset is now going every day to be later in the day,
yes,
doesn't make it feel that way, and that's more important. So when the sun sets and what the weather is like is more important than the calendar.
I would say so. It certainly feels that way. I'm trying to get my older son trained up on driving, and it's difficult. He gets home from school and the sun's going down, and he's not supposed to drive in the dark. So what are we going to do?
Yeah, it's going to be a Saturday thing. So there's this terrific piece in the New York Times today. Newtown is still so raw 5 years after Sandy Hook shooting, and they interview various and sundry key figures, some of whom are my friends. And they talk about the fact that it's just, everybody is at a different place. Everybody's at a different pace in terms of how one recovers from this. And the town will never be the same, and it'll never be completely whole. But you have to balance moving ahead with not forgetting. Yeah. And that's just a difficult thing to do, and talks about how various and sundry people go around doing that. So the name of the article is Newtown is Still So Raw 5 Years After Sandy Hook Shooting in the New York Times. I highly recommend it. And, it's just worthwhile noting that, of course, this is today, and we all call it 12/14 because we don't really want to call it anything else.
Yeah, well, noted, and I try to do that, although every once in a while when we're out of context over the years I have to, I think, remind people it's not, there's no forgetting it in Newtown. That's a simple shorthand. We try and remind everybody exactly what that's all about.
To give you an idea, which is not in the article, but was in the local paper. You may recall 20 children died and 6 educators, so 26 is generally the number of victims, but there was the 27th who was the mother of Adam Lanza, who was the 28th who shot himself.
Right.
So 28 people died, 26 victims, and then 27. And there's a whole relooking from the victim's point of view, which is the one that matters, about what do you do with the 27th?
Yeah.
Do you forgive? Do you forget? Do you move on? She made some awful parenting decisions, but was she really at fault in the sense that, people have gotten plenty of shot since then that had nothing to do with her, so she can't be responsible for everything. And that kind of perspective takes time, and it's the family members who are going through it, and I thought it was just a worthwhile point to make as well. Forgive and remember is not a bad, place to be. I haven't found it in myself to feel that way just yet, but, things happen over time.
Well, yeah, it will. It's an interesting local addition to that. I'm glad you were able to pick up on that and supplement our understanding of it.
She wasn't a bad person. She just made some bad decisions with parenting.
Yeah. I don't know how.
And they cost people's lives. So what do you do with that? Now, how do you move forward from that? Let me tell you about Sandy Hook Promise, which is some of the families, not all of the families, who have gotten together and tried to do something positive. And part of what they do is school training. So they go in and teach people about what signs to look for and how to do this. And they have some incredibly powerful public service announcements. You may recall one from a couple of years ago, which was going through a sort of teenage love story. Mm-hmm. And they show this little vignette. You can find that on YouTube, about 2 teens who sort of fall in, puppy love and get excited about seeing each other. And then at the very end of this, they finally figure out who is writing notes to each other. Some guy shows up in the doorway with a assault weapon and ominous music, and you know what happens next. Everybody screams, and then they black out the piece. Then they go back step by step about all the little hidden, subtle findings that one could have seen. The shooter just making gun finger bang things all during class. Everybody else is working. He's got the earphones on and just scowls at anybody who tries to say hello. And on his laptop, he's got gun sites, websites that talk about guns and shooting and so on and so forth. So all these little subtle findings that one could have seen that you only see after the fact. And their point, of course, is look for these things. They just released another one a couple of days ago, which is also quite good. I left that for you at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it during the show, probably not, but maybe you want to look at it later. And it's called Tomorrow's Shooting.
Yeah, okay.
It's tomorrow's news. The shooting is expected tomorrow, and they have a news broadcaster basically saying, we're here at the site of a local school where tomorrow there's going to be a shooting. And they interview various and sundry people, some of the kids. Well, I saw that he did this, and I really saw that, and tomorrow I'm going to be really, really upset that I didn't tell anybody, and that kind of thing. It's just very powerful and well worth looking.
Interesting, yeah.
It's called Tomorrow's News, and you can find it on the Sandy Hook Promise site, but I did send you the URL. And again, the point is that people are actually doing things. In the New York Times article, my friend Bill Begg, who is the EMS director, for Emergency Medical Services Director for the region. Not only does that on his day-to-day job, but also has unfortunately become an expert on what bullet wounds do to you and goes around and lectures on this so that people are aware. Everybody is taking their own separate approach in terms of how one can make a small contribution. And, it's how you cope.
Yeah, it's too big of a problem. Guns in general, too much for any one person or even one organization to take on, and there are so many angles to take on it. And it's good. It's good to have a hand and to have a coalition together.
Yeah, and when you can't solve the problem yourself because it's too big, what you do is you chop it up into little pieces.
Yeah,
and just try to deal with it piece by piece.
I handle the accidents, generally speaking, and I have a lot of help in doing that as well. But there's the suicide prevention angle. There's the accident and training prevention, or accident prevention and training angle.
There's keeping track of gun fail. Everybody has done something to help, and all appreciate it, and it takes a village and all of that.
Right.
So because of the day, I think it's all worthwhile mentioning that.
Yes.
We have other news. I have other news I want to get to too.
All right, that will be permitted.
Because, you have the rest of the show to talk about what you want to talk about.
Yeah, maybe Trump will nominate me. All right, I'll allow it. See?
Well, there's a lot going on. Let's talk about Trump. Let's talk about Alabama. Let's talk about some of the fallout.
All right.
This morning, a new Des Moines Register Seltzer poll. I love Van Seltzer, and I love Seltzer polls.
Seltzer water.
Iowa poll, 60% of Iowans disapprove of Donald Trump's job performance, and only 35% approve. That's pretty lousy for Iowa. And the context there is this little piece in The Hill. Alabama election and the USA Today editorial may signal the end for Trump, says Gregory Wallens, opinion contributor. Now, the USA Today editorial that he's talking about, you may recall, that came out yesterday, and boy, was it harsh.
I recall that it was very harsh, and I thought, hey, that's weird, and now I can't remember the language, but it was very weird.
Let's see. A president who'd all but call Senator Kirsten Gillibrand a whore isn't fit to clean the toilets at the Barack Obama Presidential Library or shine George Bush's shoes.
That's it, toilets.
Not to insult janitors who work hard, but the idea here is that Trump is the lowest of the low, and really is not fit to be in the office. And the author of this particular piece says, I don't know whether it'll be impeachment or by losing in 2020, but one way or the other, Trump can't survive a national thirst for decency because indecency is his defining characteristic. He's a former federal prosecutor, the author of this piece, Gregory J. Wallens. And, the point here is that that's also what happened in Alabama. In ruby red Alabama, it was just a bridge too far to vote for the indecent guy.
Yeah. Well, we have an epidemic of indecency, and
We do, and it's led by the guy in the White House, and there's going to be blowback for that. Let me give you an idea of some of that blowback. Monmouth poll just came out yesterday, and not only was his job approval at 32, but the congressional generic vote was plus 15. That's plus 1.5 for the Democrats.
That's
the average at Real Clear Politics is 11, plus 11 for the Democrats. And what that means is that it makes it very likely that the Democrats will take the House. In fact, Larry Sabato has a piece about that written by Alan Abramowitz, which is in Sabato's Crystal Ball. Partisan gerrymandering and the outlook for the 2018 U.S. House elections. It's a very optimistic piece in the sense that when he crunches the numbers, he figures, unlike people who say, well, it's got to be around plus 8. That's what Amy Walter and Cook Political, and that's what Dave Wasserman, say you need. You need a D plus 8 in order to bring the House back. And Abramowitz crunches the numbers and says, you know what, a plus 4 is probably enough to tie.
Wow.
At Democratic and seats at 218, and we are at plus 11, giving us a little margin there.
Okay. Well, I don't know about plus 4. After having heard plus 8 for so long. But,
yeah, everybody says plus 8. Where does that come from? Because people we respect says plus 8. He crunches the numbers and said it actually might be a little better than that. In other words, gerrymandering is why it's not just even. Yeah. But it might not be quite as bad as it looks.
Yeah. Although gerrymandering is pretty bad.
It is. And my response to that is, best thing to do is win by 13 and don't worry about it.
True.
It's 4 or 8.
Yeah. Speaking of gerrymandering, it was pointed out the other day, and I think Matt Iglesias had a tweet about it, but playing off of somebody else's tweet showing the results from Alabama. Okay, so Doug Jones just wins, and they point out, he wins statewide, but by congressional district, he wins only one of 7, I think, congressional districts in Alabama. In an electoral college style election, Roy Moore is inaugurated.
Yeah, but he only won by 1.5%, so that didn't move me the way I guess it was supposed to.
Oh, okay. Well, it was a close election.
It was such a close election. Sure. Then why is this surprising?
I don't know. I suppose it's surprising that what he was saying. Look at how aggressively.
Let's pretend just for ease of discussion.
Yeah.
It's New York City versus upstate New York, and all of upstate New York voted for Moore, and New York City voted for Jones, and New York City has 51% of the population. It's basically like that.
Yeah. Oh well.
So why is that surprising, and why would it bother anybody?
It's what's surprising about it, I think, is as Iglesias' point was, look at how aggressively the gerrymandering's been done in Alabama. 1 out of 7, okay. A close election, yes. 2 out of 7, okay. Still poorly done, but okay. Makes a little bit more sense. That they've grouped the entirety of his electorate into one congressional district is kind of, it is rather aggressive, and they do it on purpose. It makes sense for them politically to do that. But you just
I guess the pushback I'm getting about that is I tend to subscribe, whatever, to the Dave Wasserman school of thinking, which is that a lot of this is voting with your feet. If you decided to live in an urban area, and that's where the population is, and that just gets one district, and everybody else is living out there in the rural districts, they're going to have more rocks and trees. They're going to have more land area. And so I don't know what that means. That's not necessarily entirely gerrymandering. Some of it is where people elect to live, and it's just the geography. What are you supposed to do about that? And that may have equal weight or maybe a third of the weight or whatever, but it's not entirely gerrymandering. Rural areas are rural areas. And so unless you're going to mix them with the cities, that's what you're going to get.
It depends on how the gerrymandering is done.
Each state is different.
And a lot of times you have one big population center like Birmingham, or, pick your state and your population center. And they say, uptown's different from downtown, and we include some exurbs from the north and west in this one, and the south and east gets included in that one. And there are 2 congressional districts all of a sudden that have a fair shot at electing a Democrat, though they're based in the biggest city, and then it's 2 to 5 rather than 1 to 6.
Yes, And that may well happen, but some of it's going to be what Wasserman says. He also makes the point that in a wave election, which is what we're looking at here, none of that matters. You get swept away anyway. And if you thought gerrymandering was going to protect you, well, maybe you thought it was going to elect Roy Moore too, and it didn't.
Well, it wouldn't be the worst time to have a wave election. One, of course, to get rid of Donald Trump. But I guess this brings up another issue that we might as well say it here, early here, which is
Go ahead, say it. I dare you.
Let's have this wave in the state legislatures as well.
Yes, let's have everybody vote. That's what was so great about Virginia, because that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, they can demonstrate that can happen. I think we need to see more headlines about that, and say and highlighting the people who are doing
still don't know who won in Virginia. I mean, is that still going on?
That's true. Yeah, it is. And we are highlighting the work of the Run Everywhere folks. I mean, everywhere. Not every congressional district alone, but every legislative district, every town council. Everything you can do. I mean, you don't think town council is important? Well, you want to fill the legislature with Democrats.
What about school board?
Right.
What are your kids going to learn?
Nah, nothing.
You want to get that Sandy Hook promise thing into the schools so that people learn about gun safety? Well, why don't you run for school board and make sure that happens?
That would be one way of doing it. You're right.
So it's at every level. Now, again, there's another aspect of this too. It isn't just gerrymandering versus where you live, and it isn't just whether it's a wave or not. There's another whole discussion that's happening, and this, I quote a New York Times article today that I also have on the list here. Alabama loss exposes Republican fissures amid a Democratic surge. And, talks about a lot of the stuff we've talked about, how Phil Bredesen may be running for Senate in Tennessee and actually has a chance and that sort of thing. But here's an interesting quote from Charlie Dent, Republican in Pennsylvania, who's retiring and therefore free to speak his mind.
I see.
And covers something that you hear a lot about from pundits. I mean, this is like Chuck Todd's go-to question every Sunday.
Oh.
And Charlie Dent addresses it and says this: the side that has the energy and anger and enthusiasm usually prevails, said Representative Charlie Dent, Republican of Pennsylvania. And Democrats don't have to be for anything. They just have to be against us. And Chuck Todd will say, well, I don't get the sense that Democrats have a specific talking point about what they're for in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, that's a dumb question. Why do you say that? There's individual races, like, for example, Moore versus Jones. It was pretty clear what the Democrats stood for. What does the Democratic Party stand for, is Chuck Todd's question that he asked in like 72 different ways. And Charlie Dent says, dude, it doesn't matter.
In a way, yeah.
Not with a wave election, it don't. And this is looking like one. So,
yeah.
If you're talking about the House of Representatives and you're not talking about a presidential election, the whole idea of what you stand for is going to be a completely different question.
Yes. Well, that's true.
There is no, you're the out party. You don't control the House. You don't control the Senate. You don't control the White House. There's no one spokesperson for the Democratic Party.
And there never will be.
And there never will be. So Charlie Dent, has a point here.
I think so. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Chuck Todd, he likes to, impose that structure on everything, on anything, even in an individual race. What do you stand for? And then of course he and others in the media don't stand for the answers sometimes.
Yeah,
right?
How about decency and sensible policy? I mean, you want specifics? We'll talk specifics. So basically, that's what it comes down to. You got a problem with that?
Well,
Chuck?
I hope not. It brings to mind like a race like the one here.
Because the other side does not have decency. And by the way, they don't have sensible policy. Let's talk details.
Yeah. And then, in each race, it manifests in different ways. And even when it does manifest itself, sometimes the media won't accept, they won't take yes for an answer.
That's right. They won't take yes for an answer because they have this construct and they want to shove it down your throat, whether it's true or not. And it's the generals fighting the last war, and it's got nothing to do with what's going on right now. And thanks, that's my point.
Oh, okay. Well, then I got it. That's good.
You did?
I was going to say it reminded me a lot of what happened immediately after the Virginia elections with Danica Rome, the trans woman who was elected, the first openly trans candidate, certainly in Virginia. And
because she was elected on local politics, it had to do with whether or not there was traffic in the area that she grew up in.
Right. They came to ask her, what do you stand for? And she said, I'd like to fix the roads. But as a trans woman, I'd like to get to work on time. And they couldn't accept the idea that she doesn't stand for a transgender agenda.
Yeah,
no,
exactly.
I don't. I mean, I'll take it. If you got one, let me know. I just thought my neighbors said fix the roads. And so
I can't remember which election it was. It was a gubernatorial election in Virginia some years ago. And national reporters were shocked and disbelieving that Northern Virginia traffic was such a big issue.
That could be anyone.
And it swung the election because one of the candidates cared about it.
Yeah. I don't know. They do seem to discount that. Then it must have been more than a couple of years ago, because since then all the reporters have moved to Northern Virginia. They work in D.C.
So you don't have to tell them.
Right. Oh, my God.
Which is, of course, that old line about news. News is what my editor saw this morning on his way to work.
Right.
Her way to work. So, I got caught in a traffic jam. I want a big story about traffic.
That'll tend to do it. All right. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess we've cleared that mystery up for them. But, all right. It took them a while to catch on.
This is from 538, a site that specializes in synthesizing the polls. And looking ahead here, Harry Enton writes, special elections so far point to a Democratic wave in 2018. I read to you from some of his chart the other day. Yes. But the Alabama Senate winning by 30 was just part of a whole big wave. As our break comes up, it's just important to remember we really are talking about wave elections.
Well, good. Can't come soon enough, but it's not allowed to come any sooner than 2018 November. So we'll have to wait. And I was mopping my brow waiting on this Senate special. It's going to be a long way to November. We'll be right back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on Netroots Radio. We are continuing our segment with Greg Dworkin, luckily here with us to help me through another struggling show struggling with the voice today. Snow day in Connecticut, so everybody gets to stay home. Well, probably not most of your neighbors, but you get to make the call. You're lucky.
So I want to do Rick Wilson. This one's called The Limits of Bannonism.
Okay.
Just because, when he has something to say, he says it in a pithy way.
Yes, although I see up at the top here, I don't know, what do you call this line that appears above the headline? I don't know what it says. A
300-pound lump of gristle?
Yeah, that's what it says, and I think he's talking...
That's the category. That's the vertical category there.
Okay. I know. It looks like it ought to be the caption
other people
for the
might
photo.
say healthcare, or they might say, the fix, or they might say, opinion. But in this particular piece, it says a 300-pound lump of gristle, so I have an idea what he's talking about here.
Okay. All right.
He says, the limits of Bannonism.
Bannon, okay.
A favorite trope of 1980s teen movies was the moment the scrawny, awkward nerd screws his courage to the sticking place, stands up to the bully, and punches that sorry bastard right in the mouth. And that was the image I was enjoying last night when Doug Jones bested Pedo Bear Party candidate Roy Moore in Alabama.
Oh, no.
But the nerd in question wasn't Jones. It was Mitch McConnell. I've warned politicians for a generation not to underestimate McConnell's diffident affect for weakness. And this gets to Josh Holmes' comment the other day when I was on the show. We were talking about his ex-chief of staff making comments on the night of the election at 8:30 before we knew who the winner was. He was already saying this is all Steve Bannon's fault.
Okay.
He did the impossible. He lost for us in Alabama. That's Mitch McConnell's guy. He was already furious. Well, we were talking about, is that really a prudent thing to say? Well, obviously,
yes.
he's not working for McConnell now, so he has a little more leeway. But you get an idea what McConnell's thinking.
Yeah,
the emergent question wasn't Jones, he writes, but rather Mitch McConnell. I warned politicians for a generation not to underestimate McConnell's diffident affect for weakness. Last night, the majority leader took a victory lap through the bloody pustulant remains of Steve Bannon's political credibility with a couple of laps through the ichor of Donald Trump's power to control the political dialogue. Now, you can make the case that McConnell's intervention on behalf of Luther Strange helped bring us Roy Moore by starving out the more conservative and qualified Mo Brooks. And I don't know if he's more qualified. He's certainly more conservative. And there is no question about the fact that Brooks would have won this election. The thing is that McConnell, given who he is always going to stand up for the incumbent because that's kind of like his job. Yeah. Right? So You understand why McConnell might have supported Luther Strange. But we'll leave that on the table for now. Last night was an unmitigated, unspinnably bad one for Trump, Bannon, and Bannon's alt-right nationalist status claptrap. The Julius Streicher of our time pushed Trump's political credibility into a nosedive that hit terminal political velocity as he crashed the Moore campaign into the trash fire on top of burning Dumpster Mountain. I guess he didn't think it went well.
No.
It was Bannon who turned this race into a contest between his squad of Team Bannon, Roy Moore, and NAMBLA versus Mitch McConnell, the Senate, and Republicans who have the temerity not to favor electing a child molester to the U.S. Senate. Like a 300-pound lump of gristle, Bannon decided to lodge himself in the throat of the most powerful, serious Republican in D.C., and it was a bad, bad bet. So McConnell won this contest, I guess, is what he's saying.
I guess.
McConnell probably spent about an hour last night washing the bloodstains off his hands from the beatdown Alabama delivered to Steve Bannon. Is he happy about losing a seat? Absolutely not. Is he happy about not having to ever defend the odious kid predator Roy Moore? At least the Capitol Police SWAT team won't have to be on standby to extract more from local playgrounds and high school gymnasia. Alabama is a perfect petri dish of Bannonism and the nationalist, populist, anti-elitist movement for which Trump is its grunting avatar. All the hot, magical, base-moving issues were there. And Moore embraced esoteric Trumpism with the same vigor he produced his victims through local malls. He pursued his victims through local malls. Trump bellowed his support in tweets, rallies, and interviews. So basically, they're all in and lost anyway. The con game that Steve Bannon has pulled on Republicans in the last year and a half goes something like this. Only Bannon and Breitbart have an ear to the ground and a finger on the pulse of the new nationalist movement that's reshaping conservatism and its own image. The scam centers on the concept that a rising force of nationalists who hate brown people, gay people, and anyone who doesn't toe the line is unstoppable, implacable, remember?
Yeah.
Nothing's going to stop this Trump train. You remember that one?
Right.
And as the immediate disposal of Trump and Bannon, the scam puts hatred of the media and elites, by which they mean people who can read, before any conservative principle. But he lost.
Yes.
Okay, so today's walkbacks, revisions, and memory holding of Donald Trump's full-throated endorsement of Moore isn't a coincidence, but no one's fallen for it. Trump strongly and powerfully supported a man he knew to be a pedophile. Now, even though we know that's not the right word, that's the word we have elected to use. Donald Trump dispatched Steve Bannon down to Alabama in order to rile up the pointy white hat crowd in the Darwin's waiting room meeting halls, where Roy Moore's cousin curious supporters grunted and hooted their approval as Bannon capered on stage like a hirsute gremlin. It didn't go unnoticed that his fire hose of insults was not directed at Doug Jones, but at Republicans and conservatives he seeks to destroy. So last night was a small victory for decency and political sanity, a moment when America's reddest state said, nah, we're good with the abortion guy over the guy who wants to hit it with high school girls.
Okay.
Right? And the fact that Steve Bannon got beat like a rented mule is just the icing on the cake. So I guess he doesn't like Steve Bannon very much.
Or rented mules.
Yeah. Now, James Hohmann over at the Daily 202, the Washington area code,
Right.
Power Post at the Washington Post, says the suburban revolt against Trump continued in Alabama. And the big idea here is the backlash in the suburbs against Trump is one of the most significant political stories of 2017. If Democrats win the House next year, it'll be the main reason. We have to thank and acknowledge the black vote in Alabama, which won this election. But they did it in concert with either Republicans who stayed home or suburban Republicans who chose to vote for Doug Jones. And, you know, it's, of course, poignant and interesting to figure that this is what Hillary Clinton figured was going to happen, and that's how she was going to win. And it may well worked if it weren't for Comey. And so that's not how it happened. But, you know, it may happen in 2018, just 2 years too late.
Yeah, it would have been interesting if it had worked despite Comey or had Comey's letter not gone out, because today, Doug Jones, fantastic campaign, genius. Hillary Clinton, terrible campaign, awful, not allowed to write a book, shut up, go away, you lost versus an idiot. What's wrong with you? And minus, say, a Comey letter and a narrow win, like, how did she do it? What a genius. Boy, that letter sucked, huh? Thanks, James Comey.
So Harry Anton notes, James Hohmann notes at Harry Anton notes, we talked about the 538 article. There's been more than 70 special elections for state and federal legislative seats in 2017, and Democrats have outperformed the partisan lean in 74% of them.
Yes. They haven't won.
So that's why it looks like a wave election.
That's true. Well, it's a demonstration of a wave.
More. Here's more. This is Ronald Brownstein writing in The Atlantic. We are in a Trump-driven worst-case situation right now. That's a quote. The president is the common thread between the recent Republican losses in Alabama, New Jersey, and Virginia. So although Rick Wilson wanted to stick it to Steve Bannon and say it's Bannon's fault, actually it's Trump's fault.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're president, you kind of have to take that blame. And of course, nobody's sure whether he's president or Bannon is president. That's why you get these both kinds of articles.
Yeah, and that's why I wrote yesterday my pundit roundup. It was all about President Bannon losing.
You are correct.
That's what I meant by it. And by the way, may I remind you that if you look at what's going on now with the White House and how they respond to all this stuff, we identified both Bannon and Trump as chaos agents back in January, and unfortunately that's what it's been. So Ronald Brownstein writes, Roy Moore was a uniquely flawed and vulnerable candidate. This is important because it isn't just that Roy Moore lost, it's that Trump lost too. Roy Moore was a uniquely flawed and vulnerable candidate, but what should worry Republicans most about his loss to Democrat Doug Jones in Tuesday's U.S. Senate race in Alabama was how closely the result tracked with the GOP's big defeats last month in New Jersey and Virginia, which, of course, I would add Roy Moore was not on the ballot.
Right, true.
Ed Gillespie lost the same way, so it wasn't about Moore. Certainly, Moore should have and would have won in Alabama if it had not been Roy Moore. But the way that the Democrats were able to summon up the political strength to beat him is because of what else is going on, and we saw parallels in New Jersey and Virginia. Not to mention how it followed the pattern of public reaction to Trump's perpetually tumultuous presidency. I just call that chaos. Yeah. He's a chaos agent. Jones beat Moore with a strong turnout and a crushing lead among African Americans, a decisive advantage among younger voters. Remember, he's losing the millennials. And major gains among college-educated and suburban whites, especially women. That allowed Jones to overcome big margins for Moore among the key elements of Trump's coalition, older blue-collar, evangelical, and non-urban white voters. I saw a statistic this morning which was astounding, which doesn't mean I'm going to be able to put my finger on it right away. But it was something along the lines of evangelical women went hugely, like 75-25 for Moore, but it was the opposite among non-evangelical women. And there's more evangelical than non-evangelicals in Alabama, for white women anyway. So that was part of it. But I just thought it was an interesting stat, really separating where all this stuff comes from.
Yes.
And what's going on.
Make an interesting question. Now I need to know the evangelical versus non-evangelical split among black women. It would make an interesting study. Say, you know what?
Yes, because
black
there are
women
black
who are
evangelicals and black women went 98%.
Yeah.
So
there's plenty of evangelical women among the black community. They're just smarter than the ones in the white community.
Absolutely.
Okay. That could
So this
entirely
points
be
to a clear near-term threat in 2018 for Republicans. It also crystallizes the risky long-term trade Trump is imposing on his party. He's improving the GOP standing among groups that are almost all shrinking, and at the price of alienating groups that are growing.
Yes, that's wrong.
That's been Ron Brownstein's thesis all along.
And
It's
way
true
too
that
hairy.
Jones won only very narrowly over Moore, a candidate so polarizing he struggled in Alabama, even before the sexual misconduct stuff. But Jones, he said it elegantly, but that's really what it was. But Jones won in a state where Republicans enjoy his dominant and overall advantage, as they do virtually anywhere. Jones contradicted that history by consolidating the groups most dubious of Trump, the granite foundation of his victory. Huge performance among African Americans who gave him 96% of their votes and accounted for 29% of all voters, according to exit polls. That was slightly better showing in each front than Obama managed in 2012. In counties with large African American populations like Jefferson, which includes Birmingham, Dallas, which includes Selma. How sweet for Selma to do this. And Montgomery, Jones exceeded not only Hillary Clinton's share of the vote in 2016, but also in some cases bested her lead in raw votes. That's an incredible gain in a non-presidential election. Although rarely discussed, the state's growing Latino and mixed-race populations also put an important thumb on the scale for the Democrat. They represented about 5% of voters. And then Jones posted a solid advantage among young voters. He carried about 3/5 of those ages 18 to 29, about 3/5 of those ages 30 to 44. Jones' advantage with minority voters partly explains that edge, but he also ran 15 percentage points better with whites under 30 than with their older counterparts.
Okay.
So that's the whole Teixeira and John Judas,
Yes.
demographics is destiny kind of thing.
Right.
Eventually, we'll see
Yeah,
that.
I knew we had to get to that eventually. Okay.
The final piece explaining Jones' win was the substantial inroads he made with college-educated whites, especially women. Jones won 40% of those, and while by national standards it's not a great number, it's twice as large a share as Obama won. Jones lost college-educated white women by just 7, and Obama lost them by 55.
Oh, well.
That's astounding. That is a really astounding number.
Yes.
Obama won fewer than 1 in 5 college-educated white men, and Jones pushed that to 1 in 3. And in counties with large concentrations of well-educated voters, such as Madison, which includes Huntsville, space station there, Shelby near Birmingham, Lee, where is Auburn University, and Tuscaloosa, home of the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Jones consistently ran about 20 points ahead of Clinton.
Okay.
So Moore's own words and actions provided plenty of provocation for minorities, millennials, and college-educated whites, but they moved the same way in November's major elections in New Jersey and Virginia. So anti-Trump fever is now so strong among Democrats, young voters, and independents that the GOP is likely to face a surge in turnout on the Democratic side that will make 2018 midterms lurch toward the demographics of a presidential year, says longtime GOP strategist Mike Murphy, and a never-Trumper, who advised Attorney General Sessions when he first won his Alabama Senate seat in 1996. That is a looming disaster that could well cost the GOP control of the House. We're in a Trump-driven worst-case situation now. That's where that quote came from that I read at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
So one of the clearest messages from 2017's big contest is that other Republicans are now closely bound to the volatile and vitriolic president. And they're also bound with Roy Moore. Just because Moore is gone doesn't mean he's gone. Trump and the RNC endorse this guy. He's yours. You cannot wash your hands of him.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to be fun. Now it occurs to me, as you were saying, I mean, we knew that this was true. We've known it was going to be true for a long time. As soon as they re-entered the race, certainly, the RNC, you had an enormous problem. So I'm gearing up. I guess I can't wait now that the RNC gave money to Moore, the pedophile. We can come 2018. We can now they won't listen to us, but we can now loudly insist. We can now call on each Republican candidate to return
Give your
the
money back. Give the money back.
You took money from the pedophile supporters.
Yeah,
oh my
even
God.
if you already did it, we're going to call on you to do it again because you once
yeah.
took.
That's right. We didn't see.
Explain how you took money 2 years ago.
Right, you're basically taking it from.
I gave it back. Well, go ahead, explain it. I didn't ask you to give it back. I'm asking you to explain it.
Well, Get your commercials cut early.
Exactly. Here's one from Politico. Republican civil war erupts anew. Roy Moore's loss as the Bannon McConnell wings of the GOP heaping blame on one another with no signs of a resolution. I read to you the Rick Wilson McConnell side. Of course, the Bannon side is saying it's all McConnell's fault. He and people like Richard Shelby said, don't vote for our guy. We lost by a tiny fraction of votes. If they had supported us, we would have won. They are trying to take the Trump win away from you people. And don't forget the difference between you people and you people.
Yeah.
You people are you people, right? And we don't want you people.
Right.
But our people had the vote stolen from them by people like Mitch McConnell, who told us that we were unwelcome. And look what happened. We lost. That's a vote against Trump, and it's McConnell's fault. We're going to hang that around his neck. That's the strategy. The only problem with that is Trump is becoming so unpopular that doesn't work.
Yeah, well.
And no, he's not Teflon. And yes, it matters. And all this stupid punditry about none of this is going to make a difference because nothing matters because 2016 and who cares? Look at the polls that were all wrong. It's just the dumbest analysis ever, and I hope we have seen the last of it. Except we haven't, of course.
No, and that's okay because nothing matters. What?
Yeah.
Well, I have that feeling each day. There's certainly a number of things about which, there still are things about which nothing matters. It's just not as widespread a phenomenon as anyone thought. And the last couple of months really have demonstrated that at best it's a fluke when it works, but it works only for Trump. It has not worked for anyone else in any other situation. You've never been able to just simply say, nothing matters because nothing matters about Trump and we're still in this fog. I can be, a pedophile and run for Senate. Nope, it doesn't work that way.
No, it does not.
In fact,
now, here's two
worse.
other pieces that kind of, the fact that people are talking about this openly.
Yes.
Illustrate that point as well. One is by Lindy West. It's in the New York Times. It's called Donald Trump Did It.
Yeah.
It's a semi-short piece, but let me just start out with the first paragraph because that'll tell you everything you need to know.
Oh,
yes.
all right, then.
President Donald Trump has sexually harassed women. This concludes my ethics investigation.
All right.
I hate to bore you with technical jargon. I suppose it's important in the interest of nonpartisan professional transparency to offer some insight into my methodology. And she talks a little bit about that, including the fact that Trump said he did. But
yes,
it's done. Everybody knows this now. It's not even worth arguing.
I don't argue. It's worth repeating. But
he's going to argue it, but that's only going to reinforce people's idea that he's lying, and that's the next piece. This is Dave Lenhart, Ian Prasad Philbrick, and Stuart Thompson in the Sunday Review opinion section for the New York Times with an article just published today, Trump's Lies versus Obama's, graphically seen but also discussed. Trump has told 103 lies in his first 10 months. That's 6 times as many falsehoods as Obama did during the entire presidency when Obama told 18 lies. They're being very strict. It has to be something clearly that was incorrect. They found 18 examples for Obama and 103 for Trump. If they were doing the gray stuff, like, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, then the difference would be way, 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 way more.
Okay.
If you made a similar list for previous presidents, it would be just as bad. People say, no, actually not. And when you see the graph, you get an idea that, it's really not the same thing at all. So that piece is somewhere on the list here, but just make it easy to find. I'll put it right at the bottom.
It doesn't look like a graph. I mean, it's that bad. I looked at it and it's like, oh, okay. What
looks like the letter
here?
L.
Yeah. Well, it looks like a poorly
where the one
drawn...
going straight up is Trump and the one going, parallel to the ground is Obama.
Yeah. It looks like somebody did a sloppy job drawing the axes and I'm waiting for the graph.
Yeah. That's how bad it is.
Wow.
Okay. We have used the word lies again here as we did in our original piece. If anything, though, the word is unfair to Obama and Bush. When they became aware that they had been saying something untrue, they stopped. Obama didn't continue to claim all Americans would be able to keep their existing health insurance under Obamacare, and Bush changed the way he spoke about Iraq's weapons capability. Trump is different. When he is caught lying, he'll try to discredit people telling the truth.
Yes.
Right?
And continue telling the lie.
As for Obama, his falsehoods tended to be attempts to make his own policies look better or overstate a problem he was trying to solve. In a few cases, they seemed to be careless exaggerations he avoided repeating. Overall, Obama rarely told demonstrable untruths as president, and he appears to have become more careful over time. We counted 6 straight up falsehoods in the first year, and then the entire second 4-year term counted the same number 6, only one of which came in his final year in office. In all, we found 18 different bald untruths from Obama. Trump told his 18th separate untruth in his 3rd week.
It took that long, eh? They were being strict.
Exactly. So, the difference is there. In other words, Trump's a liar.
Yes.
And he's a serial sexual abuser and a predator.
Also bad.
And that's what people think. And that's how come he only got a 32 on his job approval from Monmouth the other day.
So when is he done?
Well, I don't know. You mean stick a fork in him?
Yeah, like I don't know.
Like last week, but how long is he going to stick around until he goes away?
Yeah.
Unclear.
Damn it.
I would also point out in the RCP averages here, his approval is 37, which is the lowest it has been. And his disapproval is 58.1, which is the highest it has been. So he's got a 21.1% spread there. And it's just getting worse.
He is not good at this.
Yeah, no, he's not. So, the whole idea, well, he's just going to turn it around by doing X, Y, or Z. I think we're done with that. I think these are his ceilings.
Today is the day that he finally became president.
Yeah, something like that. It's a long-awaited pivot.
Yeah.
I think maybe we can just get rid of that finally.
I guess so. Right. That could be the. It's not often that the word of the year becomes the lie of the year the next year. Pivot.
Yeah.
That could be it.
Exactly right. So that's my wrap up for today. Almost takes us to the break, but I think that the background here really has to be that optimism about how the Democrats are going to do next year in the midterm elections is based on data and past performance. And whereas future response is no, guarantee based on past performance, this year has been a very good year for Democrats already. And I just remember having this discussion after Ossoff almost but didn't win his Georgia 6 election. The fact that he came that close was hugely important. It's part of this whole picture.
True.
People didn't want to see it then, but it's true.
That was part of, has to be viewed as part of the wave. And now, as you put it, or you cited in one of the articles that put it, there's been a huge overperformance by Democrats wherever they've run. Whether they've won the seat or not is a different question. But
right, and people said at the time, I'm sick and tired of moral victories. You got to win somewhere. Well, Virginia, New Jersey, and now Alabama.
Yeah, Abby's going to New Jersey, I guess. She elected that.
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
She's going to go visit. Anyway, that's it for me. I just wanted to sum up for today, and I'm glad I had a chance to come back to the show and get all this stuff in. So I think we're done with Alabama for the moment, unless more stuff comes out. Oh, by the way, it would be improvident of me and rude and otherwise misleading for me to forget to tell you that Roy Moore hasn't conceded yet.
Oh, is that so? Okay.
Yeah. Well, he hasn't because it's in God's hands now.
Right. Well, God will chuck it out the window shortly. I'm sure.
And I'm just trying to remember who responded and said, God didn't register to vote in Alabama, but those who did said, nah, it's over.
Yeah. Right. I don't know what he thinks God's waiting for, but could I send you a bigger sign than
God's waiting for the counting of the write-in votes that aren't going to take place.
Right. I guess not.
Because the election's over, so why do they need to count it? I mean, he really wants to find out how many votes Nick Saban, the coach at University of Alabama, got in terms of write-ins.
I don't know. Maybe Nick Saban wants to find that out.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I think there's something like 22,000 write-ins, and probably Nick Saban got 21,000 of them.
Maybe. You ought to think about it. All right. One for Abby. All right. Well, thanks for the wrap up there, Greg. I appreciate stretching things out. I appreciate we were able to have you on at all. And it helps me get through the show on half a voice for you to take half the show. That is helpful. All right. Well, we've got much to catch up on. But we are right up against the break. Let's see. How about a spoiler for the, so by the way, Greg, just saying about my abrupt departure there. We were ready for it. We were prepared for it, but I figured this was the case. Abby's, apparently got it's a family reunion or something like that has arrived at the door. She's barking up a storm. So he just said, rather than barking in everybody's ear, we'll take off early and hang up abruptly, and that's okay. We'll catch up with you next week. Yes, so I said spoiler alert. Well, except I'm going to give you the spoiler. The journalisms are out. The science is no longer still out. The journalisms are no longer still out on who was shopping around the fake document smearing Chuck Schumer. And, of course, we had an indication of that early yesterday, and I guess now the reporting is done. Yes, it absolutely was Chuck Johnson and Mike Cernovich, alt-right figurines, as they are. And it was pretty much exactly who was expected. Let's see, we have a piece on that from the Daily Beast, and I did see Little Green Footballs that still converted other Chuck Johnson, Charles Johnson, who ran the place. Remember, have you all been around long enough, or are you all the history of the radio show has been one in which Little Green Footballs has been a more liberal-leaning, democratic-leaning blog. But I still wonder about that guy. He got his start, of course, in right-leaning circles, and really, I would have to say proto-alt-right leaning circles. I mean, he was virulently anti-Muslim in the early blogging days, but went through some kind of a conversion which seems to be sticking, and therefore I guess you might call it a genuine conversion. But it sticks in the back of my mind no matter what. I have not been able to forget the fact that he started out as a really vicious, like I said, proto-alt-right kind of writer. So we'll depend on the Daily Beast, perhaps, for their reporting on this one, and it's very likely that that's where Little Green Football's reporting comes from. Anyway, we'll be back after this short break and share the news on that front. We are back here at Netroots Radio with the Kagro in the Morning Show, following our brief top-of-the-hour break. As I teased you with before the break, I'm going to go to the Daily Beast for their reporting on who exactly was behind that crazy photoshopped, faked-up, alleged complaint against Chuck Schumer for, well, again, allegedly for sexual harassment. Kelly Weil, Weill, has written this one up for the Daily Beast, and I think it bears sharing the Little Green Football's take on it, because there's some additional angles on there. But even before I get to this piece from the Daily Beast, and again, that's the same publication that we were just reading with Greg, the Rick Wilson Limits of Bannonism piece, where he had 300-pound, blob of gristle or whatever it was that he called his piece. This one has got the same sort of. It's not a subtitle because it appears above the title. It's a very weird thing. This one just says "Clown Show," and well, I don't know. I guess they give you an elevator speech, pitch for their piece, I guess, above the thing here. And before we even get to it. Daily Beast is one of those sites that also promotes other or related articles in their publication alongside the piece you're there to read. We're there to read alt-right hyped sexual harassment hoax to attack Schumer. The recommended reading list is topped by a piece by Tim Tiemann that's titled this way: Heather hires mom. Remember the woman that was murdered at the Charlottesville counter protest by the alt-right wacko who drove his car into the crowd. Heather hires mom says, I have to hide her grave from neo-Nazis. Just to sort of illustrate where we are with all of this. Anyway, over to the alt-right clown show, that Kelly Will has put together for us. The fake document accusing Senator Chuck Schumer of sexual harassment copied language from a real document that exposed Representative John Conyers. That much we knew yesterday. And here's the deal. On Tuesday afternoon, right-wing social media personalities Charles Johnson and Mike Cernovich boasted of obtaining a document that would put a senator out of a job. That's, I guess, how we know that they did it. They boasted about it. Michael Cernovich and I are going to end the career of a U.S. senator, Johnson posted on Facebook on Monday. The senator was Minority Leader Charles Schumer of New York. Axios first reported. By the way, I'll note again that Johnson posted this on Facebook on Monday. Johnson is, of course, I believe, permanently banned from social media platform Twitter, another of the more popular ones that you've heard of, perhaps. Facebook apparently has not gotten around to deciding whether or not to ban him for being a white nationalist, neo-Nazi practitioner of fake news. You want to take care of your fake news problem? You could start by getting rid of some of the people who are admitted practitioners, but apparently not coming anytime soon. How do you know he's fake news? It says right here, the document was fake. A copy of the document obtained by the Daily Beast purports to be a draft lawsuit complaint against Schumer by a former staffer. It accuses him of sexual harassment. Schumer's office told the Daily Beast the document and her signature are forgeries. Schumer's office said the senator was not in Washington, D.C. or the United States during several dates in the document when he is said to have harassed the staffer. The document is a forged document and every allegation is false. We heard about that one. We have turned it over to the Capitol Police and asked them to investigate and pursue criminal charges because it is clear the law has been broken. I would like for them to cite that law so that we can discuss it and see exactly how it was broken. But I'm excited that they've got something for once that they could potentially put someone away with, and it couldn't really fall on a better target than these two guys. But I have my doubts, and this is the sort of thing that typically people aren't willing to claim credit for it out loud. And maybe that has something to do with the fact that it seems like it's pretty rarely prosecuted, this sort of thing. Anyway, it's a forgery, and apparently everybody knows it, and it's been referred to the police. Let's see. Beyond that, let's see what's new here. Indeed, elements of the fake complaint against Schumer appear to have been lifted verbatim from a real sexual harassment lawsuit against Conyers. That complaint was unearthed by BuzzFeed after Cernovich, a right-wing media personality, provided them with documents from a second similar complaint against Conyers. Why did that happen? I do not know. The Conyers complaint references House Rule 23 and a mediation process between Conyers and his accuser. The fake Schumer complaint also describes allegations as falling under House Rule 23, which of course does not exist in the Senate. The mediation process in the Schumer document was never mentioned again. After Cernovich claimed credit for bringing down Conyers, I don't think we had even gotten to the bottom of that one. I recall that people were mentioning during the overlapping storms around John Conyers and Al Franken, people were mentioning, Conyers has been brought down here by a strategic and probably partisan motivated, how would we say, it's not partisanly, anyway, something motivated by partisanship, but a strategic leak of just this one particular document covering settlements from among, several members of Congress. In fact, perhaps several tens of members of Congress who have used taxpayer funds and House funds to cover settlements. I don't know whether they were all sexual harassment allegations, but some sort of workplace misbehavior that resulted in settlements being reached and being paid with taxpayer funds. And apparently, there's a file somewhere listing all of the incidents. It's bookkeeping. It has to get done at some level, and it's not something that they have released to the public at any point. But somehow Cernovich got a hold of at least some of these files and decided to leak strategically the one that would damage the, I guess, most recognizable Democrat, or perhaps the most prominent black Democrat. I'm not sure how he did his targeting, but targeted it was. And in the meantime, by the way, Tim Kaine, I don't think I've mentioned on the show, but he's started making a public campaign to say, well, why don't we disclose this stuff? I would like for the clerk of the House and secretary of the Senate, to the extent that they control such lists, to hand them over to me for the purposes of making them public. There really is no argument at this point why members of the public who are footing the bill for these settlements shouldn't know who they're paying for. And in the meantime, since I think that's where the Blake Farenthold allegations emerged from, but apparently there are many, many more, and I think I'd like to know who they are, and you probably would too. But I didn't realize that Cernovich had claimed credit for targeting Conyers. I don't know whether that means he was the source of the leak, or whether he's just BSing and saying, the leak came from somebody else, but I'll claim credit, like, quite frankly, like terrorist groups frequently do. Oh, a bomb went off, we had nothing to do with it, but let's all claim credit. It doesn't matter that half a dozen other people are claiming credit too. As long as everybody's claiming credit, why wouldn't you want to get on the act? So I don't know how genuine Cernovich's assertion is here. But after Cernovich claimed credit for bringing down Conyers, the longest-serving member of the House, he predicted bringing down an even bigger Democrat. On Monday, Cernovich tweeted a screenshot of Johnson's statement on Facebook, because, of course, Johnson can't tweet it himself. Currently reading the sexual harassment settlement documents of a major Democratic U.S. senator, and he added, spoke with Chuck Johnson on the phone. He told me he has the whole case file. But, of course, somebody made up the whole case file, and it likely was Chuck Johnson. Good job. So that tweet is embedded here. When a journalist criticized Cernovich's sourcing on Twitter, Cernovich replied that the media was, quote, already doing damage control. It doesn't matter. I already have the legal documents, exact dates, same as with Conyers. And he really meant it. They meant it. They really were the same as with Conyers. It was Conyers. Cernovich quickly backtracked once it was reported Schumer's office had gone to the police on Tuesday. Oops, I had nothing to do with it. I was only kidding. Under D.C. law, here we are, something about some sort of hint what we're talking about. Forging a document filed in a public office, that would be like a court, is punishable by up to 10 years in jail or a $25,000 fine. I think they usually will elect to go with the fine on that one. And maybe that'll be paid by the Mercers or somebody quite like them. Anyway, we'll find out. I tried for the 10 years on this one. There's language that looks like it came from some of the Conyers stuff, like it might have been copied from there. Cernovich, all of a sudden now, is saying during a Tuesday evening broadcast on Periscope, Cernovich now said he thought the document was a hoax, but it, quote, still could be confirmed. No, it can't. Reached by the Daily Beast on Wednesday, Cernovich said he was the victim of a sophisticated forgery. That's certainly not the case. Whether or not you were a victim, I doubt very much. Whether you were a victim of sophisticated forgery, I can answer for you right now. No, you weren't. There was no sophisticated forgery. There was nothing sophisticated about it anywhere in the document. He also then provided the supposed number of the hoaxer, which was disconnected. Johnson, for his part, in other words, the number of the hoaxer was a hoax. You did it. Johnson, for his part, wouldn't directly answer questions about the forgery. There are no reporters at the Daily Beast, but I will give you a quote. Johnson told the Daily Beast over email on Wednesday, I enthusiastically look forward to an investigation. Johnson referred the Daily Beast to a Facebook post he recently wrote, which read, this is now Johnson saying, I was sent a very sophisticated complaint that claimed Senator Chuck Schumer had sexually harassed a subordinate and paid her off. After communicating with the source through encrypted email, because I'm a super spy, and texts, the source went dark because, of course, we're super spies. I sent the document to multiple journalists, lawyers, and members of Congress, all of whom agreed it should be investigated. No, they didn't. Well, actually, that's not necessarily the case. They did agree it should be investigated as a forgery. I am offering $10,000 for the identity of the persons responsible and would be happy to cooperate with any investigators. I say it's just you. Cernovich claims he's trying to find the hoaxer. I found him. It's you. This is the journalist process CNN doesn't go through, Cernovich said on Periscope on Tuesday. Yeah, of course, duh, as we discussed yesterday, it's the journalist process that made it obvious that it was a forgery. That's what you didn't go through. Look at the projection involved in this. If he's telling the truth about not being the forger, for him to say, I was fooled by a sophisticated forgery, and I forwarded it to the journalists, basically for them, he wanted them to just print it verbatim, but he could backtrack and claim it was sent for vetting, and it took him all of about 10 seconds to see, there's no lawyer listed on the complaint. And we called Schumer's office, and he was like, I wasn't even in this country at the time that it's alleged that I was doing this. And why would House Rule 23 have anything to do with me? I'm a senator. These sorts of questions actually occur to journalists. It's the journalist process, as he calls it, that CNN and others do go through that made it obvious that it was a forgery right from the beginning. You sent it on and then said, I'm the victim of a hoax, which I don't think is true. I think you're the perpetrator of the hoax. But if you were the victim of a hoax, it's because you're so stupid and so easily fooled. And look at how he tries to pin it on them. The journalists don't go through this process. Only I'm smart enough to go through this process. This very example is you not going through it and them going through it, them figuring it out, and you looking like an idiot. Or otherwise, being the perpetrator. So this is his claim. This is the journalist process CNN doesn't go through, Cernovich said on Periscope on Tuesday. CNN, they go, oh, crap, but he uses the other word. Don Jr. got an email about WikiLeaks before anybody else. Boom, 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 front page news. But me, I go, oh, wait, hold on a minute, let's chill. That's exactly what you didn't do. And, of course, he's referencing the situation in which CNN said they got a hold of emails between, Don Jr. and or regarding WikiLeaks. And the date was September 4th. The actual date of these emails, it turns out, was September 14th and not September 4th. And the reason that nobody's been fired over this is they checked and double-checked and triple-checked. Are you sure? They have notes and tape of the person saying, yes, the 4th, the 4th, the 4th. There you go. So, they got an email before anyone else. Boom, 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 front page news. Well, the boom, boom, boom is checking, double checking, and triple checking and being told, yes, it's the 4th and running with it. Now, it turns out that somebody's lying to you if you have notes on it and tape on it of them lying to you. That's what we call defensible error, I guess. And you do not go, oh, wait a minute, let's chill. In fact, Schumer's office said CNN and other outlets, including the Washington Post, BuzzFeed, The New Yorker, and ABC News, all received the document on Tuesday around the same time as Cernovich and Johnson. None of those outlets posted in advance about being in possession of the documents that would, quote, end the career of a U.S. senator, though. That was only these two dopes. Whoever did this, I don't want to know if it was a deep state operation, a Soros thing, or if it was just a prankster, Cernovich said on Periscope, but somebody's in a lot of trouble for forging documents. I think it's you. Why wouldn't you want to know whether it was a deep state operation, a Soros thing, or just a prankster? If somebody's in trouble, wouldn't you want to know who that somebody is? Can't they really not be in trouble if we don't find out? This is some really stupid hedging and basically just makes me convinced that it was them. Cernovich and Johnson both have dubious records as journalists. Neither of them have any record as journalists. They're not journalists. Johnson infamously misidentified a college student as a woman who falsely accused University of Virginia students of rape. He also falsely accused then congressional candidate Cory Booker of lying about his address and falsely accused a New York Times reporter of posing for Playgirl. Cernovich fanned the flames of the Pizzagate hoax, a conspiracy theory that accused high-level Democrats of running a child trafficking ring, a child sex trafficking ring through a pizzeria. We know all about that one. And, well, I mean, it ends there. These guys did it. That's the answer. And the rest of the show should just be whispered to save my voice. Okay. So, by the way, over at Little Green Footballs, and one day we'll have to recount their entire history, or maybe you could look it up and read a little bit about it. It's not really necessarily the subject of an entire show, but I'm still interested in seeing how he handled this thing, because he is, well, for one thing, he's the writer of Little Green Footballs is Charles Johnson, and it irks him to no end that the name of the hoaxer we were just talking, the alleged criminal, I guess, that we were just reading about is also Charles Johnson, and it bothers him to no end, I'm sure. But who shopped the fake document smearing Chuck Schumer? None other than Holocaust denier, among other things, Chuck C. Johnson, the rage Furby, as he calls him. And he says Chuck may be in serious trouble this time. For years, I've been saying that with their ridiculously slipshod standards and willingness to believe and circulate any smear against their perceived enemies, right-wing, quote, journalists and bloggers have been setting themselves up for a major hoax that would end up getting one or more of them in serious trouble. The day may have come around at last. The backstory: someone's been shopping around to various media outlets a PDF document that purported to show sexual harassment allegations against Schumer by a former staffer. Allegations of sexual harassment against politicians and other powerful men are big news right now. And as soon as they are heard about in this document, a slew of media organizations began the feeding frenzy. But it usually involves fact-checking, and it never got anywhere as a result, I would add. Let's see. Then there is the quote about the source telling Axios that reporters from many other outlets also got copies and had made inquiries about the documents. However, the document was quickly revealed to be a sloppy forgery, and the former staffer named in it has reported to the Washington, D.C. police and Capitol Police. And now for the kicker, guess who turns out to be behind this document? That's the way he puts it. Yes, it's our old pal, the Holocaust denier Chuck C. Johnson, who hooked up with rape aficionado Mike Cernovich to spread the smear against Schumer. Journalist Will Sommer highlighted some Facebook posts by the Rage Furby yesterday, boasting about his alliance with Cernovich. He also posted a screenshot of a tweet by Cernovich hyping the fake document, which Creepy Mike has now deleted. Cernovich is now trying to pretend he never hyped the document. I wonder why. Now that the fraud has been exposed and he's in big trouble, Johnson is desperately backpedaling, claiming that some anonymous person, quote, sent the document to him, like the tweets from the lawyer were sent to Donald Trump and then posted. Yeah, right. Well, let's see the receipts. And offering $10,000 for the identity of this possibly imaginary individual. Most people seem to be assuming the target of this hoax was Chuck Schumer, but it's true that Johnson didn't create it himself, an assertion we shouldn't necessarily take at face value because Chuck is an inveterate liar. I think it is also possible it was a sting intended to bring down Chuck Johnson, because he's recently been involved in a very nasty war of words with Master Rat Effer Roger Stone. And this has the smell of a setup to burn the Rage Furby and anyone who worked with him to promote it. That's an interesting possibility. But it's sloppier work than I would ordinarily credit Roger Stone with. But then again, since it was a setup, it was supposed to be discovered and discovered quickly. Our boy Chuck has had a serious run-in with the Capitol Police before when he tried to crash a fundraiser for John Boehner last year. He was detained, frisked, I'd hate to have that job, and questioned. So they'll have a file on Chuck and his stalking behavior. And just as a matter of record, our Little Green Footballs, Charles Johnson writes, Chuck has also stalked yours truly in real life, showing up in an apartment building where I used to live and posting photos on Twitter of himself standing outside the building. This is the kind of activity he enjoys. But this time, Chuck may have finally crossed the line into outright criminal behavior, all because he was too excited about, quote, taking down Chuck Schumer to do a basic fact-checking first. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. Well, there are plenty of nicer guys, certainly, but it's not likely to happen to them because they're not as dumb as he is and not as anxious to make the news for, quote-unquote, taking down Chuck Schumer or anybody else. All right, so let's see. Other pieces of news that we need to bring up and discuss. Let me shift gears just for a second here and address something outside of our news headlines. As you know, lots of you I plead with you all the time, and lots of you are answering the call to support the show with monthly contributions through Patreon. Patreon, in case you are not familiar with Patreon, and you can find my page there at patreon.com/KagroX. Easy enough to find, and we encourage you to jump on board and help out with a monthly recurring contribution that makes it possible for us to set aside the hours that we set aside each day to not make money elsewhere, essentially, and put this program together for you. And many of you have responded, and we continue to seek out more of you to do so. But then we hit a bump in the road the other day. Patreon, as it turns out, had, well, I guess we'll make a long story short. There's articles about it that lay out all of the details in, excruciating details, I guess. And long story short, apparently, they had taken on a new round of funding from venture capitalists, and that usually destroys almost anything it touches, and it very nearly destroyed Patreon as well, I guess. They took on an awful lot of money, and they took it on at a valuation that, well, in the internet world, was still kind of insane, even for the internet world. For the real world, the rest of the world, non-internet bubble world, it was insane. They were valued at something like, as I understand it, something like 56 times earnings. For those of you who, like me, understand nothing about that sort of statement, apparently for a non-internet bubble, non-tech type stock, you're really talking about, normally you don't want to value a company at any more than about 10 times its actual earnings. In other words, how long will it take to make your money back? Well, 10 times earnings is about standard, and I guess this valuation put them at over 50 times earnings, and that was going to create an awful lot of pressure on the management of Patreon to start generating some huge amounts of cash to start making good on the promise of money making for the venture capitalists who are backing them in this new round. Anyway, one of the many things, because they're probably scrambling to come up with all sorts of ways to get a hold of additional money to hand over to their new backers. One of the things that they proposed was a change in the fee schedule for Patreon that, they annoyed a lot of people by portraying the changes as being positive for the creators that they help to back. That would be people like me who create content or artwork or what have you, and seek patrons to back their work through Patreon. And this was pitched as a big improvement for creators, because creators were going to be guaranteed to get something. I think they put the number at 95%. Now, 95% of the money pledged will make it to the creator, as opposed to less, because Patreon was taking a necessary processing fee. That's how they make their money. So they pitched this new system in which contributors were actually going to end up paying those fees and paying more than they had agreed to pledge to the content creators. And you can understand how this works, right? In other words, if in most systems that work normally, you pledge to give $1 a month to me to help support the creation of the show, right? Fine. So how much is coming out of your wallet? $1. Money needs to be made at Patreon. We all understand these things. So let's say, they were taking 5% off the top. And so 5 cents for the transaction, goes to Patreon, and 95 cents goes to me. We all understood this. They were shifting things so that I would still see the 95 cents, but they were just going to charge you. You say, I'm going to pledge $1, and they would charge you $1.30 somehow and take that balance, and I end up still with the 95 cents, but congratulations, I'm making 95% of the money pledged. Meanwhile, the money pledged was $1, and they're billing you $1.25, $1.30, and it was pissing a lot of people off. And we began to see a lot of patrons drop their pledges for lots of creators, including me. Well, I do have some good news about that, and I'll continue with it on the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And to our final segment here, I wanted to continue, at least just briefly, with the good news about what was going on at Patreon after the bad news about what was going on at Patreon. I didn't get a chance to share that news with you, though I did have a few contributors share that news with me, and I was trying to figure out exactly how to address it. Meanwhile, several of you were figuring out your own way of addressing it by simply dropping your support on Patreon, although leaving notes behind that said, yeah, this is about the fees. I don't want it to be taken by the way they put it, the creator of the content. They don't want me to take it as a rejection of the content of the show. It's just that it was a stupid situation. The way they structured their fees, in addition to skimming some percentage off the top, there was also a dollar amount, or a cents, I guess, amount that they would take from every transaction, plus some percentage as well. And so that made an enormous disadvantage for low dollar contributions in particular. If you were going to pledge $1 or $2 even each month, it was disproportionate. It was people were being charged $1.37. I pledged $1. That's how much you should take from me. When it comes to pledges like that, I can't agree with any fee structure that ends up charging you more than you said. I understand the idea, and it's probably even one that lots of people would agree to when they were making their donations. They would just calibrate their donations accordingly to say, well, all right, I don't want the fees to come out of the end from I don't want them to come out of the pocket of the person I'm trying to help here. But the people who you're trying to help, like me, I mean, we also understand, look, Patreon's got to make money. I understand that there's going to be some number less than what was pledged if I'm using somebody's service to process the fees. I'm okay with that. I like the idea that you want to guarantee that creators are going to get some certain percentage of what's pledged, but I'd rather do without that and just say what's really important here is when people say they're going to give money out of the goodness of their hearts, or in this case, I guess you could say in payment for services rendered. In both instances, the amount of money you say you're going to pay is the amount of money you should be billed. That's it. Now, I mean, unless there's something up front that says there are extra fees and it's going to be this, unless that's disclosed, you can't do this. So obviously they pissed a bunch of people off. And we probably had, 10 or 11 people drop their support for the show. And like I said, it was probably mostly people who were giving $1 or $2. And that doesn't mean to me that that's not important. Those are important. We don't ask for a great deal of money here. But those people were being disproportionately affected. And they were saying, this is just a ludicrous way of giving somebody $1. I want to give somebody $1 and it should cost me $1. They understand they're getting less, but ideally the dollar just goes to them. But to charge me $1.37 to give somebody $1, no, that's just not happening. So lots of people left. I guess here's the news. They're changing their mind. They said, we screwed up. This is a stupid way of doing it. We're going to have to, we still have to scramble to find some way of making an extra cash grab to help pay off these venture capitalists. That's just the nature of venture capital, particularly in the tech game. But it's not going to be this way. So the good news is, if you're among those folks who said, screw this, I'm out of here. I'll find another way to contribute, as many of you did, or I just can't afford it anymore. And I began scrambling to look for an alternative to Patreon. And I was really pissed about it, generally speaking. I didn't bring it up to anyone's attention on the show just because I hadn't settled what we were going to do. I wanted to wait until we knew what we were going to do before I said anything. Luckily, this helps obviate some of it, at least temporarily. I just was pissed because I can't understand, how do you not make money on the model of you want me to take your cash and give it to that person, and you both agree that I can take 5% of it? All I do is I take money from you and I give it to them, and so now it's all electronic. I don't even have to break a sweat handling shrink-wrap bundles of money from one person to another. How does that not generate funds? I don't know. Well, we want to scale up and we want to offer this and that, and we're going to need programmers. Okay, you need to pay a lot of people. I understand all of that. But to take on venture capital at 56 times earnings, like, what do you think you were going to do with this? You're going to end up driving yourself into bankruptcy with a license to print money? I don't understand why you're doing this. I'm sure there's nuance to it, and it's one thing to have a service that does this. It's another thing for the market to realize you have this service, and making them realize you have this service available is an expensive proposition all by itself, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the upshot is they're not doing the thing. So if you canceled, you can feel free to come on back. You can certainly feel free to find an alternative method of getting your contributions back to us. By the way, the monthly recurring subscription option is still available technically from PayPal, and in the interim after our migration away from PayPal, apparently somebody was able to prove to me that Peter Thiel does not, in fact, get a portion of the profits when they skim the money off of each of the transactions at PayPal. So at least I feel good about that. But it was an awkward system, the subscription system at PayPal. It still exists, and any of you who are interested in finding it, I will point you to it if you email me or message me at Daily Kos, or send me a note on Twitter at KagroX or KagroX@gmail.com if you're interested in finding those links. There are other alternatives out there. I don't really want to shift everybody from Patreon because there's still plenty of you left on the system who haven't gotten either the bad news or the good news that followed. But I don't want to shift everybody to yet another platform, which will, I guess, eventually also run into the same problem. I don't know why Recurrency couldn't make it. Now I'm worried that Patreon can't make it. Who knows? And it'll just be a series of failures. And eventually people will be like, I'm just tired of resubscribing to new platforms every 3 years to support the show. Why can't there just be a simple, easy one? I know other people pointed out to me, Amazon Pay works fine, and lots of bloggers take contributions that way. I don't know if they have a monthly recurring feature or not. Amazon is at least a relatively trusted name. I don't know. Anyway, the news is Patreon says, we messed up, we're sorry, and we're not rolling out the fees change. That according to Jack Conte, who I believe is the CEO over there at Patreon. He posted a short letter saying as much, basically saying, spent hours on the phone with creators, so is the Patreon team. The feedback has been crystal clear. The new payment system disproportionately impacted $1 and $2 patrons. We got to build a better system for them. Aggregation is highly valued, and we underestimated that. Fundamentally, creators should own the business decisions with their fans, not Patreon. We overstepped our bounds and injected ourselves into that relationship against our core belief as a business. We recognize that we need to be better at involving you more deeply and earlier in these kinds of decisions and product changes. Additionally, we need to give you a more flexible product and platform to allow you to own the way you run your memberships. I know it will take a long time for us to earn back your trust. That's true. We are, though, utterly devoted to your success and getting you a sustainable, reliable income for being a creator, and I hope that's the case. But, it comes a little bit too late for the 10, 11, 12 people who left and who I now either have to hope hear this message and come back, or I have to pursue and say, yeah, I saw that you had to stop with your donation, And I wondered, you indicated that it was the fees, and now we have to have the uncomfortable conversation where I track you down in cyberspace and say, they're not going to make the fees changes. Do you want to come back to Patreon, or do you want to find some other way? And it's just really not the way I wanted to spend my time. But I have spent it, and there's nothing I can do about it now except to move on and say, well, good news that they're not implementing the changes. And now, back to the news. All right, so let's see. Other things that need attention. Unfortunately, that one did. We have got, let's see, we could go over to that gigantic Washington Post piece and read about what a risk Trump is to tracking down, stopping, and preventing any future meddling in our elections by Russia, though likely you have spent the morning reading about that. Perhaps we turn our attention elsewhere. Part of my Twitter feed was occupied this morning with about half a dozen different issue areas, all similarly addressed by the tweeters, as I cannot believe, or I'm amazed that there's not more attention being paid to this thing. All right. One of them, recently documented by David Farenthold in his writing at the Washington Post and on Twitter, of course, is that the emoluments machine still up and running. That one's still actually functioning well. That one's really the fine-tuned machine, the emoluments machine. He notes the third straight night of parties at Donald Trump's hotel in Washington, D.C., all funded by the same super PAC, fourth party in a week. What's going on here? And I don't know if he's written it up in article format or not. I should probably scan his Twitter feed to see whether he has. But what's essentially happening here is a super PAC, the America First super PAC, has been collecting donations, as super PACs usually do, from political supporters all over the country. And they've been using their cash to throw parties at the Trump D.C. hotel. People come to the parties, whatever. They have different themes. They've done it this way and that. But basically, all it is it's taking the money that they've collected in the super PAC, which cannot be handed directly as cash payments, according to law anyway, if things matter, can't be handed directly to Donald Trump to put in his pocket. They're supposed to be used for political activities. So what do? They have political parties. Where do they have them? They have them at the Trump D.C. hotel, the payments for which can be put directly into Donald Trump's pockets. An emoluments machine. And this is the fourth time they've done it just this week. Very interesting and well worth keeping an eye on. Amazing in this sense, I believe it was Matt Iglesias who found it amazing that we weren't all focusing on this as opposed to any one of the other number of issues that we can't believe anybody's not focusing on. We can't believe nobody's focusing on Donald Trump's sexual harassment. Can't believe nobody's focusing on, I don't know, you name it. There's any number of things out there, one of which I have brought up before. And maybe we can use this moment to try and remedy some of it. Let's see about the length of the article that we're talking about. It looks to be pretty long, although it's pretty picture dense too. Maybe we can get through it. I have expressed regret at not discussing Yemen's situation. And I guess you could say I'm amazed that we haven't paid more attention to that. And I guess I really am amazed about that. And I didn't know where to enter into discussion about it at this late date. I have two pieces. Neither one of them I don't think I will get through in its entirety. But the other day I mentioned, it's a disgrace that we really haven't discussed it at all. And the nearest article at hand was from The Economist, entitled How and Why to End the War in Yemen. And I said, that sounds like one that might be promising, although I am a little bit hesitant because The Economist, not really my favorite source for foreign policy information for decision-making purposes, although it sounded like a good idea, ending the war in Yemen. That sounds pretty promising. But isn't there somebody else I might have more sympathy with than the staff of The Economist. And so I now have this one a few days later. The Intercept, which also, has its problems, but also has done admirable work and run some very great writers' work, as well as some people who I approach with more caution, let's say. But I have, in the main, less doubt about where they're coming from, with few exceptions, at The Intercept than at The Economist. So let's try with this one. Plus, it comes highly recommended from Ryan Grimm, and we like him. Of course, he works there. Full disclosure, he highly recommends it because he works at The Intercept. But he didn't always. And we learned to trust him elsewhere, so we've got a track record, right? The U.S. ambassador to Yemen's hardline approach is jamming up peace efforts, Alex Emmons writes, and it is alleged to be a very important piece on the subject, so why not jump in here? One night in mid-August 2015, a fleet of warplanes circled over the Yemeni port city of Hodeidah. I hope I'm pronouncing that even close to correct. Since that spring, a Saudi-led coalition had been carrying out a devastating bombing campaign. The United States had been helping the coalition with targeting, arguing that its precision guidance of airstrikes would mitigate civilian casualties. But that night, the coalition raid leveled the port, destroying 5 massive cranes that were essential for unloading cargo ships. Clinging to the shore of the Red Sea, Hodeidah is the entry point for nearly 80% of Yemen's imported food. And that's what's making the war in Yemen such a huge humanitarian crisis. Enormous starvation and famine there. I know they're conducting a war, and in olden days, back in the medieval era, you didn't blink at starving people out when you were holding them in siege. But in the modern era, we look on this a little bit differently. With the cranes gone, the flow of goods into the country slowed to a trickle, and the international community scrambled to fend off famine. The U.S. government donated $3.9 million to the World Food Program to purchase new cranes, which took months to arrive. When they did, the Saudi-led coalition turned away the ship that was carrying them. As the famine accelerated, the cranes sailed back to Dubai. Aid organizations accused the coalition of pursuing a deliberate strategy of starvation when it has led to the worst humanitarian crisis of the century. And remember, it's only been days since the worst humanitarian crisis of the century was migrants fleeing to Europe. Despite the fact that the United States has paid for the cranes, and I guess we'll throw in mention here, by the way, we haven't fixed our own territory of Puerto Rico yet either, but I don't know that ever got designated with was never crowned worst humanitarian crisis of the century. It sucked and it was terrible, but it never made it to that level. Despite the fact that the United States had paid for the cranes, and does that not anger Donald Trump that they didn't get there? One senior U.S. diplomat opposed their delivery. Matthew Tuller, Tueller, the U.S. ambassador to Yemen, argued that it was pointless to deliver the equipment because it would only be destroyed either by coalition bombs, the opposition Houthis, or a future military offensive by the United Arab Emirates. Why is the UAE involved in so many operations throwing their weight around? I guess it's interesting. You laugh at the idea of the weight of the UAE because it's such a tiny territory, but I mean, we brought this up with relation to Saudi Arabia and Qatar not that long ago. I guess it doesn't make any sense to count the grains of sand and count Saudi Arabia as that much bigger, badder, tougher, or weightier than UAE. Anyway, the cranes have yet to be delivered. According to multiple current and former State Department officials, the pushback was characteristic of Tuller, who, as the primary U.S. diplomatic liaison to the Saudi coalition, frequently took positions sympathetic to the Saudis and hostile to the rebel Houthis. We got to get to the bottom of this conflict one of these days. I want to bring us up to speed on what's happening right now, but we're going to have to dig and figure this thing out. Tuller was and remains a central figure in peace negotiations, which have not resulted in a peace deal or a lasting cessation of hostilities, as talks have faltered, a cholera epidemic is spiraling out of control. The nation's infrastructure has been reduced to rubble, and some 50,000 children are expected to die of disease and starvation by the end of this year. And that is not far away. This portrait of Tuller and his role in the failed peace negotiations is based on interviews with 6 current and former senior State Department and national security officials who worked closely with Tuller, all of them asked to remain anonymous in order to share diplomatically sensitive details. Tuller is a career Foreign Service officer who has held posts throughout the Middle East, serving in Egypt, Iraq, and Kuwait. A graduate of Brigham Young University and Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a father of 5, he rose steadily through the State Department ranks, gaining a reputation as a well-respected and deeply knowledgeable diplomat. He became ambassador to Kuwait in 2011 and attracted little public attention, aside from a happenstance run-in with Kim Kardashian. Around the same time, Arab Spring protests threatened the rule of longtime Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Saleh's deputy, Abdu Rabu Mansour Hadi, took control of the government as part of an internationally brokered agreement. His power was later cemented by an election in which only his name appeared on the ballot. Good old elections. But in a bid to return to power, Saleh formed an alliance with his former enemies, the Houthis, and in 2014 they stormed the capital city and placed Hadi under house arrest. I guess we are going to get to the bottom of this after all. Hadi fled the country in March of 2015. Shortly afterward, Saudi Arabia began its air war to restore him to power. After all, he had been elected in an election with nobody else on the ballot. The Houthis are mainly drawn, ready for this, from the Zaidi sect. I'm guessing a pronunciation, Z-A-Y-D-I. Zaidi, I'm guessing. A Shiite group that ruled a 1,000-year kingdom in northern Yemen until 1962. According to their leader, Abdel Malik al-Houthi, I guess that's where the Houthis come from. Yes, they are leading a nationalist revolution against corrupt officials, Islamist extremists, and their foreign allies. And who can tell who's an Islamic extremist there? All right? Everybody is, in one way or another. However, the group is itself backed by, and here's the problem, Iran. Though the extent of Iran's support and influence is frequently exaggerated. Iran cautioned the Houthis not to storm the capital, for example, and the Houthis disobeyed their warnings, a decision that arguably set in motion the crisis that engulfs the country today. The Houthis have also been accused of numerous human rights violations themselves, from imprisoning journalists and activists to restricting the flow of food into Taiz, Yemen's 3rd largest city. Tuller was confirmed as ambassador to Yemen in March of 2014, and a year later the United States evacuated its embassy in Sana'a. Saudi Arabia and its backers in the West, including the Obama administration, expected the war to end quickly. UN Security Council Resolution 2216 called on the Houthis to withdraw and demobilize and declared Hadi the legitimate president. These were terms a victor would offer the enemy he had vanquished. By the end of 2015, however, it was obvious that the war would not end quickly, with Secretary of State John Kerry preoccupied with more pressing crises, like the situation in Syria. Tuller was largely left to his own devices. During peace talks, Tuller energetically backed Hadi and Saudi Arabia's one-sided peace plan based on the UN resolution, according to current and former State Department officials. The framework required the Houthis immediately to surrender their weapons and leave the capital, with their political future undetermined. Later talks would determine what role the Houthis would have in Yemen's future government. The plan required the Houthis to trust that the parties that were currently bombing them would later give them a seat at the table. It sounded so unrealistic that some critics suspected it was an internationally obstructionist and disingenuous offer from Hadi designed to undermine the talks by setting the stakes of the talks so knowingly so high so that the other side finds them unacceptable, one diplomat told Reuters. Tuller who represented the United States at peace talks beginning in 2015, did not press the Saudis or Hadi to offer the Houthis better terms, the current and former State Department officials said. As a matter of policy, Tuller opposed the Houthis having any role in Yemen's future government. Instead, he told the Houthis that they should agree to the plan before the humanitarian situation worsened. Mohammed Abdul Salam, spokesperson and negotiator for the Houthis, later said publicly that Tuller went even further than Hadi or the Saudis in pressuring him to accept the deal. In Abdul Salam's telling, Tuller threatened that the coalition would wage economic warfare on Yemen if the Houthis did not accept an immediate surrender. The last meeting was with the American ambassador and the 18 ambassadors, Abdul Salam said in a 2017 speech, and he said, "You have before you an agreement. You either sign it or you will be faced with an economic embargo. We will move the bank, block imports, and close the Sana'a port." And that's exactly what he said in the presence of everyone. Multiple sources in Washington briefed on the negotiations said Abdul Salam's version was indeed consistent with Tuller's position that the Houthis had to accept the agreement as is, or else the Yemeni people would face worsening humanitarian conditions, though the sources were not in the room for the conversation. Whether Tuller made that specific threat or not, it's notable that the Houthi negotiator would make such a charge publicly. At the very least, Abdul Salam's statement suggests a deep distrust between Tuller and a key party to the conflict. By the spring of 2016, more than a year into the war, both the Obama White House and State Department began to question why Tuller was pushing such a one-sided plan. In May of 2016, John Feiner, Kerry's chief of staff, sent an email to Tuller asking why he didn't support the formation of a national unity government. A unity government would include members of the various factions, giving the Houthis a seat at the table in the form of ministerial positions or other roles. The email was one of several exchanges with Tuller that were widely circulated around the State Department. Its contents and those of other exchanges with Tuller on topic were described to The Intercept and confirmed by multiple former officials. Feiner's concerns were seconded by Eric Pelofsky, a senior director for Yemen on Obama's National Security Council, who also wrote directly to Tuller. Feiner and Pelofsky, in their emails, urged Tuller to move past the framework of the UN resolution and offer something the Houthis might actually accept. Sounds like the sort of position they would normally take, right? Tuller responded by saying the Houthis were negotiating in bad faith. Saleh had already violated the internationally brokered agreement that put Hadi in power, he argued, so why wouldn't they violate a future agreement that prescribed them a limited role in government? The full-throated exchange of differing views was widely circulated around the State Department, and its contents were described and confirmed by multiple former officials. Feiner and Pelofsky both declined to comment. As the negotiations stretched on, State Department officials in D.C. began to feel like they were in the dark about what exactly Tuller was doing. Kerry's staff pushed to receive more frequent updates. When press reports emerged about the negotiations being deadlocked, Feiner pressed Tuller again on why he wasn't pushing negotiations toward the idea of a unity government. This time, Tuller gave a different response. He relayed to D.C. that he thought a unity government would be less willing to serve U.S. interests in Yemen. It would be less receptive to U.S. efforts to fight al-Qaeda in Yemen, and it would not secure Saudi Arabia's southern border. Ironically, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is in fact fighting alongside the coalition and against the Houthis. Kerry sent Tuller a new set of instructions directing him to change his approach. Did it work? Well, that we don't actually have time for. We do have time, of course, to tell you what's coming up next, but I wanted to kind of at least introduce this concept, and maybe we'll say that we'll continue with the reading of it, because, we all want to get to the bottom of why does The Intercept think Tuller is standing in the way of a better solution to the humanitarian crisis. And you know that they've got some idea of it. Now I've got you interested, perhaps. Maybe I'm just teasing you. Is it a spoiler alert? We're going to ruin it for you? No, we don't have time to ruin it for you. We're going to continue with this probably on Friday and keep this in our sights. There are, of course, many other stories that we'll want to round up on Friday, and lots of comments from those of you who are listening to the earlier part of the show, just pointing out, for instance, as Michael Musson did, that yes, Alabama is kind of an extreme case, but yeah, there was in fact a lawsuit about the gerrymandering there, and they did, in fact, win with a judge finding that many of the districts were formed with the direct intent of suppressing the minority vote. Yep, it's true. They were awfully aggressive there, but I get Greg's point, no doubt about that. Now, what about what's coming up on the rest of the programming day here on Netroots Radio? We'll try and get a short summary of what Justice Putnam has got for you. I've once again eaten into his promo time by winding up with my own comments, but that's my prerogative on the show. Just let you know, there's always good stuff coming up next. We'll squeeze some of it in
Daily
after
Codes
this.
Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
How about this? We neglected this one. An appetizer of Jerry Nadler slamming his own committee during the Rosenstein hearings. Then they've also got an examination of how, after black voters powered Doug Jones to victory in Alabama, the GOP has now declared their votes don't count. Let's get details on that from Justice coming up next.